A cold night descended on the village. The wind blew smoke from the chimneys toward the forest, and the streets were quiet, except for the dogs barking at shadows in the yards. A young man named Alain was returning from the mill. He was carrying bread baked by his mother in a canvas bag. The bread was coarse, but warm and filling, and it smelled so good that he wanted to eat it right away. On the road, he met an old man. His clothes hung in rags. He wore torn shoes on his feet, and his face was covered with a thick beard. The old man asked for a piece of bread, saying he hadn't eaten in 3 days. Alan stopped. There was only one loaf of bread in the bag, and his mother and sister were waiting for him at home. But he still took out the bread, broke it in half, and gave half to the old man. The old man looked at him for a long time and said that he would never forget this kindness. Then he disappeared into the darkness. Alain stood there for a long time, watching him go. He did not know that in the morning this decision would change his life and the fate of the entire village. Friends, I am glad to welcome you. Tell me, where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments. It will be interesting to know. I wish you pleasant listening. With the first rays of the sun, the village awoke. People opened their gates, drove out their cattle, and children ran through the streets. But soon everyone stopped. A column of horsemen was moving toward the village gates. There were many of them, and with each step of their horses, the earth shook. The tips of their spears glistened, and banners fluttered above the ranks. At first, everyone thought it was a raid, and the women screamed, calling their children home. The men grabbed their pitchforks and axes. But at the head of the column rode a horseman in armor, decorated with gold patterns. His helmet shone in the sun, and it was clear that he was a man of high rank. He raised his hand, and the army stopped. The horseman dismounted, took off his helmet, and everyone recognized him as the beggar to whom Alain had given bread the night before. The beard and rags were a deception. Before them stood the famous commander, whose name was known throughout the country. He said that yesterday he wanted to test the hearts of ordinary people, and only one young man did not pass by, sharing his last piece of bread. The commander announced that from now on, this village would be under his protection. The people stood stunned. Alain felt everyone looking at him and did not know what to do. After all, he had simply given bread to a hungry man. But from that day on, his name would be remembered in the area. Meanwhile, the village elder approached the commander and bowed low. The commander ordered the people to gather in the square because he had something to say, not only to the young man, but to the entire village. The soldiers dismounted and stood at the gate. No one dared to object. Alan walked home and thought about how everything had changed in one night. Just yesterday, he was a simple miller's assistant, and today the whole village looked at him as a hero. But he did not feel like a hero. He was anxious. What would happen next? Almost the entire population gathered in the village square. The men stood in front. The women held their children behind their backs. The commander stood straight. 2 warriors held the banner next to him. His face was stern, but not cruel. He said that he had come not for tribute or threats, but to show that a kind heart is more valuable than gold. He said that last night, hiding his name, he had sought mercy among the people, and only one young man had responded. Everyone looked at Alan. He felt his cheeks burning. The village elder stepped forward and said that Alan's entire family had always been honest and hard-working, and that no one doubted his kindness. But the young man himself wanted to sink through the ground. He could only think about how there would not be enough bread at home for his mother and sister, and all the attention seemed unnecessary to him. The commander noticed his embarrassment and said that there would be a reward for this bread. He ordered his soldiers to bring out sacks of grain and barrels of salt. The village had not seen such supplies in a long time. The women whispered, the children tried to get closer, and the men exchanged glances. Everyone understood that this was more than a handout. After that, the commander sat down on a bench by the well and told Alan to come closer. The young man approached and bowed low. The commander said he wanted to know his dreams. Alan replied that he only dreamed of his family living in peace and not going hungry. The commander smiled and said that this was a small desire for someone with a kind heart. In the evening, when the army set up camp behind the village, the people did not disperse. They brought straw and firewood and helped the soldiers. Alain sat with his mother outside their house. She asked if he understood that their life would never be the same again. He said he did not want glory, he only wanted to share. But his mother reminded him that good deeds are never in vain. The next day, the commander called the people together again. He said he was looking for brave men willing to serve in his army. The men looked at each other. Many were afraid, but some stepped forward. The commander looked at Alain and said he saw a future warrior in him. Alan didn't know what to say. He knew how to work with millstones. He knew the smell of flour and the sound of a mill wheel, but he had never held a sword. The elders said that the young man was still too young. The commander replied that courage and heart were more important than age. That night, Alain did not sleep. He thought about his mother and sister. If he left, who would feed them? But if he stayed, would he betray the trust of the one who saw something more in him? In the morning, he went to the commander and said he was ready to try. He was accepted into the squad of young warriors. The instructor, a senior centurion, ordered them to train with wooden swords. The first blows were difficult. Alain quickly became tired. His hands trembled. The other young men laughed at him, saying that a miller would never become a warrior. But he continued. After a few days, it became clear that although he had little strength, he noticed things that others did not see. He anticipated movements and dodged faster than expected. The instructor noticed this and said that he had natural agility. For the first time, Alain felt that he could achieve something, but inside, he still felt fear. Would he let down those who trusted him? At the end of the week, the commander announced that he would move on, but would leave some of his men to guard the village. He said that Alain would go with him, and that his mother and sister would be protected by the soldiers. His mother cried. His sister held his hand, but he knew there was no turning back. When the army left the village, the people saw them off in silence. Alain sat on a horse that seemed too big for him. He looked back and saw his mother standing at the gate. He knew he would not be returning any time soon. Ahead of him lay roads, battles, and trials. But it all began with a piece of bread given to him at night. The road the army was traveling stretched across fields and forests. The days were long, the nights cold. Alain was used to the noise of the mill, to the steady flow of village life. But here, every day brought new trials. The horsemen rode ahead, the infantrymen behind, and the supply trains stretched out in a long line. At first, the young man felt like a stranger. The soldiers joked among themselves, reminiscing about past campaigns, but he remained silent. They teased him, calling him a country boy, but he did not respond. His mentor told him that patience was more important than quick words, and that in battle, a silent man was often stronger than a talkative one. One evening, when the camp was already set up, the commander rode past the campfires. He noticed Alan sharpening a wooden sword with a stone, as if he believed it would become real. The commander asked the centurion who he was. The centurion replied that he was the young man for whom the army had stopped in the village. The commander ordered that he not be ignored. A few weeks later, they reached the castle, where the governor of the region welcomed the army with honors. For Alain, this was a new challenge. It was the first time he had seen tall towers, stone walls, and knights in shining armor. Townspeople, merchants, and beggars stood in the square. Everyone reached out to the soldiers, threw flowers, and shouted greetings. That same evening, a feast was held in the castle. The soldiers were given meat and wine, but only the nobles were seated at the main table. Alain remained among the soldiers, but he was interested in watching. He saw how the rich talked to the commander, how they tried to please him. Suddenly, he noticed a familiar face among the servants. It was a man from a neighboring village, once his neighbor by the mill stream. But now he stood in ragged clothes, bringing cups and jugs. Alain remembered how, as a child, he had dreamed of becoming a warrior, but poverty had forced him into servitude. Their eyes met. The neighbor recognized him, but pretended not to notice. Later that night, when the camp was asleep, the man approached Alain. He said that life was unfair. Some were born with a title, others with a shovel. He warned Alain that not everything was so simple in the castle. Among the guests were those who wanted to use the commander, and the feast itself could be a trap. The next morning, his fears were confirmed. Soldiers found the body of a guard at the castle gate. The centurion said he had been killed quietly, with a knife. The commander ordered the guards to be reinforced and said that there were traitors among the allies. For the first time, Alain saw how war begins not on the battlefield, but at the table. Here, the power of the sword was not enough. It was necessary to notice the small details. He remembered his neighbor's words and realized that he now had to be more careful. A few days later, the conspiracy was uncovered. Several noblemen wanted to poison the commander. They were captured, but in the crowd at the trial, Alain saw that same neighbor servant. He was accused along with the traitors. Alain realized that if he did not intervene, the man would be executed. He approached the centurion and said that this man had warned him about the conspiracy the night before. The centurion did not believe him, but the commander, hearing the story, ordered an investigation. Witnesses were found, and the truth came out. The servant had helped uncover the treason, not participated in it. He was released. The servant cried, and Alain realized he had done the right thing. The commander looked at the young man differently. He said that it was important for a warrior not only to wield a sword, but also to see the truth where others see a crowd. That day, the warriors stopped mocking Alain for the first time. They realized that this country boy had managed to save not only the commander's life, but also that of the entire army, which could have lost its leader. In the evening, by the campfire, the mentor told him that this was the first real step on the path of a warrior. For the first time, Alain felt respect not only for himself, but also from others. But in his heart, he understood that there would be even more difficult choices ahead, and the bread given to the old man was only the beginning of the road. The army remained in the castle for several more weeks. The commander negotiated with the local ruler for supplies of grain and men. For Alain, this was a time of learning and observation. During the day, he trained with his sword, and at night, he often sat on the wall and gazed into the distance. He thought about his mother and sister, whom he had left behind in the village, and wondered if he had done the right thing. One evening, the centurion called him. He said that the commander wanted to talk to him alone. Alain was surprised, but he went. In the hall, where maps hung and torches burned, the commander stood by the window. He said that there was something familiar about Alain, that he reminded him of a man from the past. The young man did not understand what he was talking about. The commander continued. Many years ago, before he became famous, he had been in their region. There he had had a relationship with a woman. She had refused to go with him, but he remembered her face. And now, looking at Alain, he saw a reflection of that time. Alain was confused. He didn't know what to say. The commander said it was just a guess, but he wanted to find out the truth. He ordered a messenger to be sent to the village to find out about the young man's family. While they waited for news, life went on as usual. The army was preparing for a campaign against a neighboring city where an uprising had broken out. The soldiers sharpened their weapons and forged arrows. Alain was also preparing, although he was plagued by doubts. He remembered his mother's words, how she said that his father had died when he was a baby. A few days later, the messenger returned. He brought news. Alain's mother had indeed raised her children alone. No one really knew his father, only that he was an outsider who had come and gone. The commander listened in silence, then said that it all made sense. Alain did not believe it. It was difficult for him to accept the idea that the very man he considered a chance encounter could be his father. But deep down, he felt that this was why the commander looked at him differently, why events gravitated toward him. This news did not remain a secret. Rumors quickly spread among the soldiers that the young man might be the leader's son. Some looked at him with envy, others with respect. But Alain himself felt only heaviness. He did not want a special position. He wanted to be seen for who he was. Soon the army set out. The march proved to be difficult. The city they were heading for was fortified. The soldiers prepared for an assault, but the commander decided to use a ruse. He sent a small group to sneak through a secret passage at night. Alain was in this group. They moved quietly at night. It was dark in the secret passage, and the walls smelled damp. The centurion walked ahead, holding a torch. When they reached the city gate, things did not go according to plan. The guards spotted them earlier than expected. A battle began. Alain found himself in a real battle for the first time. His heart was pounding, his hands were shaking, but he remembered his training. He dodged a blow and struck back. His wooden sword had been replaced with steel, and at that moment he realized there was no turning back. He wasn't the strongest in the fight, but he was the most observant. He noticed that there was another narrow passage in the wall through which part of the detachment could be brought inside. He shouted this to the centurion. The centurion listened, and it saved them. The detachment broke through and opened the gates on the other side. When the army stormed the city, the commander said that victory was possible thanks to the young man. Even those who had previously laughed at him acknowledged this. After the battle, the commander called Alain again and said that he saw in him not only a son, but also a warrior who earned respect. He said that blood was important, but actions were more important. Alain returned to camp tired, But for the first time, he felt that his path had meaning, but anxiety remained in his heart. If he was indeed the commander's son, then his life was tied to power and war, and he wanted only one thing, for his family to live in safety. And yet, the path had already been chosen. After the victory in the city, the army lingered to restore order. The townspeople greeted the soldiers without joy. The streets were quiet, the shops were closed, and children hid behind their mothers' backs. People were afraid that the victors would loot and take revenge. The commander gave strict orders. No one was to take what did not belong to them, and no one was to be harmed. He said that the army brought order, not disaster. Allen often walked the streets, observing the residents. He saw beggars hiding their hands in their sleeves, merchants afraid to open their shops, and old people sitting at the gates of their houses, as if guarding them with their gaze alone. At that moment, he realized that war destroys not only walls, but also people's trust. One evening, he noticed a group of soldiers secretly taking sacks of grain from the warehouse. They were not strangers, but his own people. They laughed and said that no one would find out. Alain understood that if he kept quiet, the residents would go hungry tomorrow. He went to the centurion and told him. The centurion frowned, but checked the words. The guilty ones were brought out to the square and punished in front of everyone. The commander said that the law was the same for everyone, and that the army had no right to stoop lower than those it was supposed to protect. After that, the residents began to look at Alain differently. Women approached him and thanked him. Children reached out to him. He felt that now his actions meant more than his origins. But not everyone was happy. Some of the soldiers harbored resentment. They believed that the young man was rising too quickly and interfering where he should not. Rumors spread throughout the camp. Some said he was the commander's favorite. Others said he was a spy. One night, while he was on guard duty at the gate, 3 men approached him. They surrounded him and said it was time to return him to the village before it was too late. They pushed him, and one of them took out a knife. Alain knew he was no match for them. But suddenly, in the darkness, the former servant he had saved from execution appeared. He rushed at his attackers, shouted, and they retreated. This incident was a turning point. Now no one could deny that the young man had friends among the common people and among those who had once despised him. His actions resonated with others. A few days later, the commander announced that it was time to prepare for a new campaign. A coalition of enemies was gathering in the neighboring lands, and a great battle was imminent. The army set out on its journey. The road was difficult. People were tired. Horses were falling from exhaustion. In the villages they passed through, the inhabitants greeted them with suspicion. But once they came across a village where everything was destroyed, the houses stood empty, the fields were abandoned. Only a boy, thin and dirty, sat by the well. He said that his family had died and he was left alone. Alain gave him his portion of bread and water. The soldiers laughed, saying that he was giving away his last again. But the commander watched silently. Later, he ordered the boy to be left in the wagon so that he would be safe. At night, the boy did not sleep and told Alain that he had seen enemies preparing in the forest. He knew the paths that led to their camp. In the morning, Alain took him to the commander. The commander checked the information and realized that the boy had saved the army from an ambush. Thus, the child who had been considered useless became an unexpected benefactor. The commander ordered that he be taken care of, and the soldiers stopped laughing at Alain for sharing his last. They realized that his actions were more useful than their mockery. At the council, the commander said that the young man was teaching them the most important thing: to see people, not just enemies. He added that this quality was more valuable than physical strength, but a battle lay ahead, and no one knew who would live to see its end. The army approached the valley, where the enemies had fortified themselves on the hills. They were more numerous and knew the terrain better. The commander understood that the battle would be difficult. He gathered the warriors and said that the outcome of the battle depended not only on the strength of the sword, but also on the determination of each individual. In the evening, bonfires burned along the river. The soldiers prepared for battle, repaired their weapons, and sharpened their blades. Allen sat apart. He felt as if his heart was about to jump out of his chest. He saw the older soldiers calmly cleaning their armor, as if they were going about their usual business. But for him, this was his first real battle, where everything would be decided. He hardly slept that night. At dawn, a horn sounded, and the army lined up. The commander raised the banner, and the troops moved forward. At first, everything went smoothly, but when they entered the valley, the enemies attacked them with arrows from above. Warriors fell one after another. Screams, the clang of iron, and the neighing of horses filled the air. Alain found himself among the infantry. He took cover behind his shield as arrows rained down on the ranks. Suddenly, he noticed that the enemy was preparing to flank them on the left, through the woods. If they succeeded, the entire army would be surrounded. He shouted this to the centurion, but the centurion said he had no proof, and that orders could not be changed. Alain couldn't take it anymore. He gathered a few young soldiers and ran toward the forest. There, they encountered a group of enemies who were indeed preparing to attack from behind. The battle was fierce. The young soldiers were barely holding their ground, but Alain noticed that the enemies were moving more slowly on the wet ground. He ordered his men to aim for their legs, and it worked. When the enemies retreated, Alain and his comrades returned. They were met with distrust. Many thought they had deserted. But soon, scouts confirmed that it was their actions that had saved the army from encirclement. The commander said in front of everyone that the young man had shown courage and the ability to see what others did not notice. He added that it was precisely such actions that decided the outcome of battles. This came as a surprise to the soldiers. The one they considered a village boy turned out to be the one who saved their lives. Now laughter gave way to respect. Even the most stubborn admitted that without him, everything could have ended differently. The battle lasted all day. By evening, the enemies had retreated. The field was littered with bodies, and the air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Allen stood tired, his hands trembling, but he understood. He had done what he had to do. After the battle, the commander called him to him again. He said that the young man had not only courage, but also the ability to think. He reminded him that they might share the same blood, and that perhaps fate itself was leading him down this path. Alain remained silent. Inside, he felt fear. He did not want to become part of someone else's plans. But he understood that from now on, his life no longer belonged only to him. His actions affected everyone. In the camp after the battle, the soldiers shared their stories. Some recalled how Alain had led them into the forest. Others said that he had acted without orders and that it could have cost them their lives. But they all agreed on one thing: without him, they would have lost. The servant he had once saved approached and said that fate had chosen him for a reason. Alain listened, but did not respond. He just looked at the sky, where smoke rose from the fires, and thought about how a simple decision to share bread that night had brought him here, to the battlefield, where he stood among the dead and the living. And that was only the beginning of great trials. After the victory, the army set up camp near the valley. The soldiers rested, treated their wounds, and collected trophies. It seemed that the danger was behind them, but there was still unease in the air. Too much blood had been shed, too much fatigue had accumulated. That evening, Alain was on duty at the supply train. His job was to watch over the sacks of grain and barrels of wine. Everything seemed normal until he noticed something strange. One of the carters was acting nervously. He kept looking back, as if he were waiting for someone. At first, Alain didn't think much of it, but when the driver approached the barrels and began fiddling with the lids, the young man became suspicious. He quietly moved closer and saw that the man was throwing some kind of powder into the wine. Alain's heart stopped. He realized it was poison. If the soldiers drank it, the army would be destroyed without a fight. He didn't know what to do. If he shouted, the man would have time to escape. Alain grabbed a stone and hit the driver's arm. The man cried out and fell, but immediately lunged at the young man with a knife. A fight ensued. The knife flashed close to his face, but Alain grabbed his opponent's arm and pushed him away. The driver lunged forward again, but the guards rushed in when they heard the cry. They tied him up and took him away. When the commander was told what had happened, he ordered all the barrels to be checked. Poison was found in 3 of them. The centurion said that if it weren't for the young man, the entire army would have been defenseless. During the interrogation, it was discovered that the driver had been bribed by the enemy. He had been promised gold if he poisoned the soldiers. He confessed that he was planning to flee during the night. Rumors spread through the camp instantly. The soldiers said that death had come to them, not on the battlefield, but directly in a cup of wine. Many looked at Alain with gratitude. He had saved them a second time. But the young man had a heavy feeling inside. He thought, how many more traps await? War is not only swords and arrows, it is also betrayal, deception, and poison. And in this world, you can always lose your vigilance. The commander ordered double guards to be posted and said he would rely on Alain's vigilance. He added that many senior warriors had not noticed the trick, but the young man had. It was a recognition, not only of his courage, but also of his intelligence. That night, he sat by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames. It seemed to him that war was changing him faster than the years. Not long ago, he was just a simple village boy, and now he was saving the army from destruction. The next day, the commander held a council. He said that the enemy was not only strong, but also cunning. They needed to prepare for a new battle, where betrayal could be more dangerous than arrows. Alain listened and understood. Now he was not just one of the soldiers. People looked up to him and counted on him. And if he made a mistake, many would die. It was a burden he had not chosen, but one he could not refuse. In the camp, people whispered. If the young man was really the commander's son, then it was fate. Some rejoiced, others envied, but no one doubted that he played an important role. Alain, however, had other things on his mind. He thought of his mother and sister. He understood that any day he might not return, and then they would be left alone. But now he could not stop. Too much depended on his choice. After the wine conspiracy was uncovered, a strange balance settled over the camp. The soldiers looked at Alain with respect, But discontent arose among the noble officers. They whispered among themselves that too much attention was being paid to a simple young man, the son of a miller. One evening he was summoned to a tent where several knights had gathered. Their armor gleamed, and their cloaks bore coats of arms. They said they could not allow yesterday's village boy to stand beside them in battle and receive praise from the commander. One of them said that war was a matter for the nobility, not peasants. Alain listened and remained silent. He understood that it was useless to argue, but one of the knights suddenly added that if the rumors about his relationship with the commander were true, then that changed everything. The others laughed, saying that such talk dishonored the army. To them, he remained a mere upstart. The commander learned of this conversation. He summoned the knights and said in front of everyone that he valued people not by their birth, but by their deeds. He reminded them that the young man had already saved the army twice, but this only increased their hostility. Envy, quiet and dangerous, took root in the hearts of those who were accustomed to considering themselves superior to others. Meanwhile, the army moved on. On their way, they entered rich lands. Here stood estates where the owners lived in prosperity, and the peasants worked in the fields. The soldiers saw the contrast, the luxurious houses of the lords, and the emaciated faces of the common people. Looking at this, Alain remembered his mother, who worked from morning till night for a piece of bread. In one of the villages, the people came out with bread and salt. But the commander noticed that their eyes were full of fear. He ordered to find out the reason. It turned out that the local lords took such heavy taxes from them that the peasants lived worse than beggars. Alain heard their complaints and could not remain silent. He said that the soldiers had come not only for battle, but also for justice. Others echoed these words. The women cried, the men nodded, but the knights standing nearby looked at him grimly. For them, his speech was an insult, a simple boy lecturing those who bear coats of arms. In the evening, one of the senior warriors approached him. He said that such words were dangerous. War is waged not only with swords, but also with politics, and that many would want to get rid of anyone who interfered with their usual order. Alain realized that he had become not only a warrior, but also a threat. His actions and words went beyond the bounds of what was acceptable. But he couldn't stop. He saw too clearly how unfair life was for ordinary people. A few days later, the army stopped at a large city. Negotiations were to take place here. The commander was going to meet with representatives of the nobility and the clergy. In the camp, they said that the fate of the entire region would be decided. Alain witnessed how the nobility flattered the commander, offering riches and promising support. But their words showed no concern for the people. It all boiled down to profit. Then, for the first time, the young man felt that his place was not among those who thought only of power and gold, but among those who lived simply but honestly. But it was precisely this difference that made him dangerous to others. That night, he heard whispering outside the tent. Two people were arguing. One said that the boy had to be eliminated before it was too late. Otherwise, he would destroy the established order. The other replied that it was risky because the commander was protecting him. But the first said that even the commander had enemies, so the time would come. Alain froze when he heard these words. He understood that now the threat came not only from enemies outside, but also from those nearby. At dawn, an alarm went off in the camp. One of the guards was found dead by the river. His body indicated that he had not been killed by enemies, he had been struck in the back. The commander ordered an investigation, but the soldiers exchanged glances. Everyone understood that the enemy was now inside. Alain felt that the sentry's death was connected to the conversations he had heard during the night. He tried to tell the centurion, but the latter said that without evidence, his words could be turned against him. During the day, envoys from the nobility arrived at the camp. They brought gifts and promised help, but Alain noticed that among their people were faces he had seen at the tent the night before. He realized that the conspiracy was wider than it seemed. In the evening, as he was returning to the camp, he was attacked. Two hooded men grabbed him and dragged him toward the forest. He resisted, but he was too weak. Everything seemed lost, but suddenly there was a whistle and stones rained down on the attackers. Children and women, refugees whom the army had recently taken in, jumped out of the bushes. Among them was the very boy to whom Alain had once given bread. They shouted and threw stones until the soldiers arrived and captured the murderers. It was unexpected. Those who were considered superfluous and useless saved the young man. When the commander learned of this, he said that even the weakest can become a pillar of support at a decisive moment. The captives were taken to the camp square. Under torture, they confessed that they had been bribed by noble knights. The conspiracy was uncovered, and several prominent warriors were brought to trial. This came as a shock to the army. The warriors realized that danger came not only from enemies, but also from those who bore coats of arms. The commander said that honor lies not in a coat of arms, but in deeds, and that the young man, saved by ordinary people, had proven this better than any words could. After that, much changed in the camp. The peasants and servants who had previously kept to themselves began to feel needed. They helped, treated the wounded, and brought water. Alain saw that his example and their actions were changing the mood in the army. But inside, he felt uneasy. He understood that now his enemies would only become more dangerous. His every move was being watched. Every word could be used against him. One evening, he was sitting by the fire when the commander approached him. He said that the young man now had a choice: either remain in the shadows and live as a simple soldier, or accept his destiny and become a leader. Alain did not know how to respond. He only said that he wanted his mother and sister to live in peace. The commander looked at him and said that sometimes, for the sake of that, one must take on more than one wants. That night, the young man lay awake for a long time. He felt that the moment when everything would be decided was approaching. A few days later, the army approached the borders where the enemy forces had gathered. There were many of them. They had built fortifications and set up roadblocks. Everyone understood that a decisive battle lay ahead. The fate of the entire land depended on its outcome. The day before, the commander gathered the army and said that this was a test not only of strength, but also of loyalty. He reminded them that the enemy had tried more than once to defeat them with cunning and treachery, and that now everyone had to prove whose side they were on. Alain listened and felt his heart beating in his chest. He remembered all the steps that had led him here: the bread given to the old man, the servant he had saved, the boy at the well, the conspiracies he had uncovered. All of this had been preparation for what lay ahead. At dawn, the troops lined up. Fog covered the field, horns blared. The enemies moved first, striking with heavy cavalry. The ranks faltered, the earth shook under their hooves. Alan stood in the infantry. He held a shield and a spear, and when the horsemen charged, he leaned back with the others, holding back the blow. The cries and clanging of steel became one noise. Several times he thought he was going to die, but he remembered his mentor's words. Patience and attention save lives. In the heat of battle, the enemies sent a flanking detachment to strike from the rear. The commander noticed this too late. Then Alan gathered a small group of volunteers and ran to intercept them. There were few of them, but he understood that if they did not delay the enemies, the entire army would be surrounded. The battle was fierce. Young warriors fell one after another, but Alan held his ground. He saw that the enemies were losing their formation on the uneven ground. He shouted to his men to use the terrain, and it worked. The enemy squads slowed down, and the army had time to regroup. The commander led the main attack and broke through the center of the enemy lines. The battle lasted until sunset, but by evening the enemies had retreated. The field remained in the hands of the army. After the battle, the camp was quiet. The soldiers bandaged their wounds and buried the dead. The commander gathered his men and said that victory had been made possible by the courage of those who had been underestimated. He pointed to Alan and said that his actions had saved not only the squad, but the entire army. The noble knights were silent. Now even they understood that coats of arms and titles meant nothing in the face of real action. The commander announced that he recognized Alan as his son, but he added that this recognition did not give him power. His strength lay in his actions, and only his actions would determine who he would be. Alan listened and felt a strange sense of relief. He was no longer afraid of his lineage. He understood that it didn't matter whose blood he had. What mattered was what he had done himself. The boy he had once taken in approached him. He said he dreamed of becoming like him. And at that moment, the young man realized that his journey was not over. The good he had done continued to live on in others. In the camp, they talked for a long time about how a simple guy had changed the course of events. Some said it was a miracle, but Alain knew that it all started when he simply shared his bread with the hungry. The next day, the army moved on, but in the hearts of the people, there was already a certainty. As long as there were people like him around, they had hope. Alain thought about his mother and sister. He dreamed of returning to them, but he understood that his life was now tied to the road and battles, and yet he believed that one day he would be able to return home not just as a miller's son, but as a man who had done what he had to do. Thus ended the first great journey of a young man who was underestimated by everyone except one old man in rags, the one who turned out to be a commander and a father. And justice prevailed. The good done in the silence of the night returned many times over and changed the fate of an entire region.